Welcome, seers, prophets, and warrior kings to the forgotten crypts of Ea. Today we are really starting up the story and the events from the narrative expansion Crucible of Wills, Ashes and Faith. And in the last video I introduced the stage and its players. We have Rainleaf and the Nords coming to knock on the door of the Old Dominion tomb city, which houses Andronicus, and basically asking for ancient technology that was taken from Yggdrasil. If you want to know more about that, I have the full video down below. And in today's video, we're going to begin talking about the actual missions. Every scenario. There's 4 of them total. And each of them has like this really cool mini story, like a narrative prelude, if you will, kind of setting up the scene of what's happening. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that the events from one game do reverberate to the other, so victory is always important and impactful from game to game. In this video specifically, we're going to talk about the first 2 scenarios and how they kind of set up the arc for the story itself. And it all begins with the Nords' longboat crashing ashore far from their home. Now, one thing I want to mention really quickly, if you like these videos and you're interested in Conquest, please consider using the affiliate description, or rather the affiliate link or code in the description down below. You'll save 10% on all your purchases, and it throws a tip in my tip jar at no cost to you. It supports me, my wife, our cats, the whole thing, and it means the world to me. So scenario 1 is called The Necropolis Awakens. And in my mind, it opens up a lot like a movie scene. The Nords arrive at the city of, I believe it's Petra is how it's pronounced. And this is actually on the far eastern or northeastern side of the actual map, which for some reason is not where I thought we were going, but this actually ends up being very convenient for the Nords because this area has river access that goes right up to the doorstep of the city. You know, relative to the rest of the continent, it's still like a day's march from where the river is, but you know, close relatively speaking. Rainleaf Faithbringer leads the Nords and is the first to set her sights on the city of Petra. And this place is described in a really cool way. Essentially, there's a massive cavern. Think of like a rock wall that's kind of been hollowed out. If you've ever seen those like with stalactites and stalagmites and that kind of thing, it's a city that's built into one of those huge caverns. The only real light source is an opening that comes from the top opening of the rocks, and it lets in a little stream of light. Otherwise, the whole area is as dead as it can be. The sand is like darkened and lifeless. There's no active defenses or lookouts. In fact, she's kind of taking observations of this place, and rather than being like a city, it's almost like this entire structure is a tomb created to honor the soldiers of the Northern Crusade that we talked about in the previous video. And it kind of seems like a tomb specifically, even like back when the Dominion was functioning and before the death and all that kind of stuff, rather than this being like a city that then fell. Now, at the center of this huge necropolis is a huge throne, with the petrified remains of Andronicus Firebringer, hero of the Northern Crusades, sitting atop it. At the throne's base, in a jeweled display, is the Veil Siege. At least that's how I'm pronouncing it, because no amount of research has helped me understand how Parabellum wants me to pronounce this word, so I'm going Veil Siege. And remember, that thing is our MacGuffin. This is an artifact from Nordic lore that helped pick up and elevate humans to the role of Einherjar and imbue them with divine blood. This is what Rainleaf is after, and honestly, we get a lot more description of this thing in this section of the little booklet, because from what I can understand, imagine seeing one of those capsules from the Matrix that people are in, where it's almost like this techno version of a baby in the womb, but it's a full-grown person. Well, this thing is kind of similar to that. It's got an amber-colored container with what seems to be a living humanoid thing inside of it. Whatever the Veil Siege is, it looks like a person, which is kind of in line with, the outcast, the alien race that kind of made the Nords and their history. They are of the same, we'll say, technological branch as the Spires, so I'm kind of imagining like a force-grown drone stuck inside of a tube. I don't think that's terribly far off. But whatever it is, Rainleaf orders her personal bodyguard of Valkyries to come and take the treasure back to the ships. while she stays and looks for any more artifacts or lost information, things that might make this whole travel worthwhile. Because she knows there's not a whole lot of time left. Essentially, the whole army moves into this throne room, they find the thing that they're there for, she takes it out, but there's a deal that's clear with the Jarl leading the army with her. She gets to kind of do a sweep for the most important things, and then the Jarl and all of his raiders and Huskarls and the rest of the army then gets to pillage the city as much as they want, keeping anything that they like, as long as Rainleaf gets the Veil Siege. So we're kind of on borrowed time here, like we need to get this thing out of here before the party really starts for these Nords. And they do just that. So Rainleaf and her personal guard stay in the throne room while the rest of the army is moving our MacGuffin outside back to the boats. But as Rainleaf is studying all of these ancient inscriptions and stuff, the Necropolis begins to stir. Heroes that have been entombed for ages, wrestling to register the horror that they saw in the Northern Crusades, were beginning to awaken from their slumber. The first one that we see was Andronicus himself. Atop his throne, his hand began to reach for his sword, and his personal guard began to awaken. Now this moment right here sets the scene for Scenario 1. The Veil Siege, our plot MacGuffin for this whole booklet, is already outside of the tomb, along with the bulk of Rainleaf's army. So it's just her and a few remaining guards. The Old Dominion forces are technically here in mass, but they're not fully awake yet. And one thing I love about this particular scenario is that it uses First Blood rules. We're in a tight chamber where our heroes meet one another for the first scene, but for the Nords, it's a fight to get out and an effort to wake up by the Dominion. In this moment, Rainleaf sees an opportunity to slow down the Old Dominion from basically rousing to war. And the idea here is, maybe if I take out their leader, it'll kind of weaken whatever willpower is calling the others in. And that's like the impetus for the fight. She wants to strike him down to hopefully slow down this process of mobilization, whereas he's trying to mobilize as fast as possible. What's funny is that this fight can aid Rainleaf's efforts later in a very dramatic way, but it's not the only event happening right now, because this campaign booklet does something I think a little bit different and interesting from the others. Scenario 2 is actually happening simultaneously within the context of the narrative, right? So that's our Necropolis Awakens Scenario 1 First Blood rules, but while Rainleaf is in the main throne room, gearing up to fight Andronicus, the Veil Siege is being transported out there, out of this whole Necropolis thing by the bulk of her army. And this is really where we introduce the Jarl that I mentioned earlier. Once he, Gunner One-Eye, gets the items back to the boats, his boys will have free run of the entire city to loot as they please. They've already gotten a mountain of stuff, but there's more. But as he is escorting, our MacGuffin outside, he has no idea that the tomb is waking up. Remember, they left right away, so they didn't see what's happening behind them. And not only that, he also doesn't seem super ready for what's about to happen. Like, there's a little note here where he's like a super hotshot Jarl, and he's been doing this for a while, but he's largely had a history of raiding fishing towns and 100 Kingdoms villages, right? Not undead veterans of eons old wars. So he's a little headstrong and maybe doesn't know what he's walking through at the moment. That's also probably why he was dumb enough to accept the bargain that Rainleaf laid out in the first place. Now, as Gunner's army approaches the gates to exit, presumably the gates they entered before, shadows close up around them as a force of Old Dominion, led by Ziliarch Aklis, form ranks. Now my assumption here is that as the army entered, it awoke the gatekeepers. So when the intruders turned to leave, the force of Old Dominion, warriors, at least some cobbled together, was right there waiting for them. Whereas it took a little longer for Andronicus to awaken because it took them longer to get to him. Regardless, this means Gunner One-Eye needs to fight his way out of the city just to deposit the MacGuffin so he can come right back and pillage the city. And this scenario is fun because it uses a lot of these storied regiments, meaning it's Rainleaf's personal Valkyrie guard who were actually carrying the item, and they are awesome. And you have Gunner One-Eye has his own rules. The Ziliarch and his Praetors are also unique, and it's played at I believe a 1500 point Last Argument of Kings army game. This scenario has a fun deployment with one player kind of using the center of the board and the other one surrounding them. Sort of like a fight through or push through narrative mission. And as to the fate of each of these war parties, that is for you and your opponent to decide on. But I'll pause our story time here because it's a great breaking point. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to these missions. The first one is, even though they're both happening simultaneously, and we're kind of moving into the why is this cool section, because even though they're both happening simultaneously in the following missions, who won each of those will matter. They matter as independent actions, even though thematically they're happening at the same time. The basic question is this: does Rainleaf escape with her little entourage that she had there, or do most of them die on her trying to flee? Over to Gunner, the question isn't whether or not he loses the MacGuffin, it's simply a matter of what are the losses when he punches through. Because as the tomb is waking up, there's just so many more Old Dominion troops than there are Nords in total, that just time is the enemy of their faction. The more that wake up, the less chance of survival the Nords have. And so that's kind of our running theme throughout these missions, is just they're trying to get out of there as fast as possible. Now, continuing on the why is this cool, as I was reading this booklet, it occurred to me that this is my favorite of the Crucible of Will sets. Okay, I've done, I think one was the Dwegom and the Humans, or 100 Kingdoms, the other one was the Sorcerer Kings and the City-States, but none of those sets captured my interest like this one. As I mentioned, how the characters are great foils to one another, but it's more than just setting. I find the actual campaign layout and the mechanics of using it much better. 2 battles that happen thematically at the same time, on different fronts, facing different enemies, using as many of those notable narrative regiment rules as you can, and both of them, independently, decide how quickly the undead of the Old Dominion can react to these interlopers. In fact, the first mission and its setup really made me think of the movie The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. I don't know if you remember that. In that film, they have no issues walking right up to the plot devices. Like day one, they walk up to this excavation site and find the Book of the Dead and the titular mummy. But it's when they find that thing that the horrors begin. Or it's not the harrowing trip to discover the MacGuffin, it's the survival once you do. And this kind of has a similar vibe, right? Rainleaf just walks right in, just struts up to the place and, finds it through ancient texts covered in dust, opens the door and bam, MacGuffin's in full view right there. And you're just thinking to yourself, maybe things will be cool. And of course, they were not cool. Right? There was plenty of things to kill these folks around them. And one of the things I enjoy about this campaign series is that the story surrounding the Vale Siege is clear. Like, it's not like a whoever won the last battle is the one in possession of it, where it could just be very one-sided of someone holding on to it the entire time, because the player is currently winning all the time. But the story is like, nope, the Nords have it. They have the initiative and the MacGuffin, and it's on the Old Dominion player to wake up and get their stuff back. So instead of wondering where it is between these forces and trying to write a story that can account for who has it at the moment, it's instead a matter of a story of reclaiming an object, which I like. Now, personally, I like First Blood more than the full Last Argument of Kings, and it's for scenes like this. It's representing a small warband getting ambushed in a tomb, and that idea is objectively cool. And the freeform way that units can move, I feel brings it to life. I do wish I had a 3D printer to make some of that terrain. This would be a really cool, mini battle report. I might work on that in the future. And these missions actually, they went by really quickly. I was able to put 2 in the same video simply because the meat on the bones is that they are just great setups for games. This could easily be a 100 Kingdoms expedition who's trying to get a Dwegom artifact, and you just sub out different armies. And that's what I mean. When I say that these books are inspirations for games, they're just pitches of why forces fight. And I like this one because the nature of the armies and why they fight is so universal of, I have a thing and you want it back, that it applies to any faction you want. And in my next video, we're going to conclude with the final 2 scenarios and talk about the different conclusions you get based on who wins the actual campaign. I hope that you will join me for that. Please share this with a friend if you are interested in Conquest whatsoever. I love these little booklets, and right now we have the Conquest Paint-Along League going on, so be sure to tune in for that. I have links to videos explaining that in the description down below. Thank you so much for listening, and happy wargaming.